Let's be clear about the actions of some individuals and political groups in here. It is hypocrisy to question the ICC arrest warrant. It is shameful that the far-right groups and the conservative EPP attempted to block this issue from today's agenda. I expected such behavior from anti-democrats, but what justification does the EPP group have? The ICC arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, former Defense Minister Gallant, and Hamas Commander-in-Chief should not be questioned by anyone. It's an obligation of all our member states to implement it. It is their obligation, not question it by anyone. Respect for international law must be maintained consistently, regardless of who is the aggressor and who is the victim. And as far as I know, there is not an international law for Israel and another international law for the rest of the world. There is no difference between perpetrators and those silently and actively watching people being killed. Don't forget that silence is to be complicit. Stop defending war crimes for God's sake.
Thank you, dear colleague.
I used to believe the European Union embodies its core values. But how can anyone still believe that? What we are witnessing is crimes against humanity. Israel went as far as to making targeted deadly attacks on UNRWA staff and property. And when that didn't make them leave, they decided to ban them. Still, the EU's silence and failure to condemn Israel's actions means we are de facto supporting it. I'll admit I was hopeful last week that the EU will stand united in backing of the ICC ruling to issue arrest warrants against senior Israel leaders and Hamas officials, as we portray ourselves as defenders of the rule of law. Yet, once again, the deeply rooted double standards have prevailed. You should be ashamed. And to all of you who still pick and choose when and for what you uphold EU values, there's no decision to be made. Do better, colleagues, and be quiet when the children are sleeping, not when they are being killed.
Dear colleagues, in the light of daily war crimes committed in Gaza and Lebanon, the ACC arrest warrants are a grim consolation for tens of thousands of victims. I welcome ACC's decision and call on all states to respect it and to defend international law and institutions. Let's be clear. Protecting international law and ensuring accountability for all, regardless of nationality or position, is imperative. The ACC must fulfill its mandate to uphold justice and prevent future violations. What's even more striking than the double standards often applied, including the EU institutions, toward Israel is the silence of President von der Leyen. Silence is complicity. In 2012, the European Union received prize for its contribution for post-war peace in Europe. The question is, does it still deserve it? The actions of its leaders speak for themselves. Not in my name. Ceasefire now. Sanctions now. Peace now.
Thank you, dear colleague. Next speaker, Madame Jarre.
Dear colleagues, nothing can justify the brutal Hamas attack on October 7 or the suffering of Israelis still held hostage. While recognizing Israel's right to self-defense, it is impossible to justify its response, resulting in over 40,000 civilian deaths in Gaza. And I want to address this humanitarian catastrophe happening in front of our eyes. This winter, millions of Palestinians face hunger and diseases, lacking homes, food and medical supplies. And the role of UNRWA is vital. It is providing essentials like food, water, healthcare and education, and there is no replacement in the region. Israel's bills labeling this UN agency as terrorist organization take effect in 2 months, yet, as I said, there is absolutely no viable alternative in the region that can replace this agency's crucial aid. Let me be clear, Israel has no plan B for war refugees, and if we all fail to act, history will judge us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. Mr. Clausen, you have the floor.
Arrestordren fra den internationale domstol var klar.
Thank you. The arrest warrant from the ICC is clear. The Israeli government has systematically violated international law with direct attacks on civilians, denying medical care, for example, and this is having horrendous repercussions for the Palestinian people. And how can the EU defend this? What will happen if there are no consequences to this after January? There needs to be an arms embargo and there needs to be sanctions imposed against Israel as well. I'm ashamed of what the EU is doing. It's so hypocritical. The EU says that they support international law and humanitarian law and fundamental rights, but then we have innocent Palestinians being killed. We cannot simply take that approach. We need to see action, not just words, and we need to prevent these war crimes against Palestinians.
Thank you, President, Commission, colleagues. De geweldsspiraal in het...
The spiral of violence in the Middle East is continuing day after day, and we consider this normal. The normal numbers of victims are disappearing into page 6 and 7 of our newspapers, and the destruction of the Palestinian villages and also Lebanon not being talked about at all. We have to stop this violence. There is no justification for the unimaginable number of civilian victims through violence, but also through displacement and famine as a weapon. The international law needs to be followed up. The ICC's arrest warrants are justified and binding, purely and simply. Mr. Netanyahu's death campaign undermines peace and undermines the release of the hostages, in fact, because Mr. Netanyahu has left these hostages in the lurch from the very start. And from the EU, it's an embarrassing lack of any attack on Israel, suspending the association agreement, stopping any kind of organizational cooperation. You should not be subject to violence because of your nationality.
Domnule președinte, doamna comisar, stimați...
Mr. President, Madam Commissioner, dear colleagues, I don't think we should use a double standard here. We have two conflicts, and we should have the same definition of the attacker and of the person and of the victim defending itself. The hostages have to be released. We've been discussing this since October last year, and not all of the hostages have been returned. We need several paths in order to offer humanitarian aid, but we cannot say that Israel is the only guilty party here, as long as Hamas is an attacker and a terrorist organization that has organized attacks in the past. I think we should be fair and find a solution for peace in order to keep people from dying and to keep children from losing their parents and not having access to food. This is the right solution, not taking sides depending on different principles. We have to treat international conflicts in the same way.